Nicola Bulley was 45 years old when she disappeared. On the morning of Friday, the 27th of January this year, she dropped her two daughters to school in the village of St Michael's-on-Wyre, then took her dog, a Springer Spaniel named Willow, for a walk by the river. She emailed her work. She sent a text to a friend arranging a meeting later that week. She joined a work call, but kept her camera and microphone off. At 9:30 that morning, 20 minutes after her last confirmed sighting, a passerby found Nicola's phone on a bench, still connected to the call. Her dog was off its harness, alone, by the same stretch of the River Wyre. Nicola was nowhere to be seen, and it would be 3 weeks before her body was discovered, a mile downstream. Over the course of those weeks, speculation as to her fate became ever louder and wilder. From the beginning, Lancashire Police believed this to be a missing persons investigation. Others disagreed, particularly on social media, with many so-called influencers descending on the village to conduct their own investigations.
So I'm just going to put this out there. This is just my hypothesis.
Only 10 minutes unaccounted for in the mysterious disappearance of the UK dog walker. But as the search continues, I'll keep you guys updated.
Lancashire Police put details of Nicola's private life into the public domain in a ham-fisted attempt to wrest back control of the narrative around her disappearance. Today, an independent report criticised the police handling of the case.
One of the decisions which has arguably the most significant impact on public confidence was the release of personal information about Nicola's health. But we are in no doubt that releasing this information in the manner the constabulary did was both avoidable and unnecessary.
I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily. Our crime correspondent Martin Brunt is outside the venue in Preston where the report was launched. And Martin, I suppose we should state from the outset that the investigation itself wasn't criticised.
Yes, there is some praise at the start of the report for the investigation and the way the search was carried out, and that original hypothesis that Nicola had gone into the river and probably drowned was correct. But there's an awful lot of criticism in this report. It really goes downhill from then on. One of the biggest criticisms is after about 2 weeks of the investigation, police decided to release personal information about Nicola. They decided to say in a press release that she had significant alcohol issues and struggles with the menopause. Now, reporters had asked about any vulnerabilities of Nicola right at the start of this investigation. The police said, no, there's nothing. If they had told us in confidence, reporters, that there was this background, we would have better understood why police were so keen to rule out a crime. And it would have informed our coverage. But because they didn't, because some of us picked up on Nicola's background and there was a fear amongst police that somebody was going to report those personal issues, the police jumped in and released them themselves in a very cack-handed way. National College of Policing, in its report, talked about that decision to release that information as avoidable and unnecessary. They're soft words. That sounds like a slap on the wrist. I think it was much more serious than that, and a lot of other people do. There were claims that in releasing that information, the force was being sexist and misogynistic. In a press conference today, the police have denied that, but I think that criticism will reverberate.
I mean, Martin, I remember being in the newsroom when that information emerged, and I remember us all kind of almost sitting up straight and paying attention, because we're simply not used to information of that nature being released in the manner in which Lancashire Police chose to do it. I mean, so explain how that would have worked.
It had been the practice some years ago for when there was a sensitive investigation and there was information about a missing person or perhaps a murder victim or somebody else who was the subject of a police investigation, a crime. There was information that the police did not want to put out for lots of reasons, perhaps because of it was so sensitive that the family wouldn't want such information to be out in the public arena. But in the past, we've had press conferences where we've been given the basic public appeal for information, and then we've been taken aside and told, look, this is information that we want you to have because it will inform the way you report it. Now, If we'd been given that information about Nicola right at the start, we would not have used it. But it would have informed the way we reported the police investigation. What the police did, what happened was that they created this vacuum of information. So to all intents and purposes, Nicola had vanished into thin air, and it threw up all sorts of conspiracy theories, not least suggestions that her partner Paul Ansell was in some way responsible for her disappearance. I mean, this is written out in the report today. All of that, we believe, could have been avoided.
And of course, there is an absence of detail when there is merely speculation and very little of it, in fact, informed speculation. Others will fill that space with their own thoughts, and so it proved. I mean, the amount of interest in this story that came from social media. Yep, there were 500 media calls going into their press office, but there were 75,000 social comments about what was taking place during this investigation. Did the report say anything about the way in which that aspect of the public response was managed?
Yes, well, if I tell you that some of those TikTok detectives were let in as journalists into the first two press conferences, that gives you an idea of how badly Lancashire Police were in their sense of social media and how it was going to impact on the investigation. So the report says that Lancashire Police really failed to understand the impact of social media and the effect it could have on their investigation. And all those comments you talk about, 75,000 comments, the impact that all of that has on public confidence in Lancashire Police. And of course, the longer the search for Nicola went on without finding her, the greater that loss of public confidence becomes. But it was also, the report also says that issue around Lancashire Police's failure to understand social media has wider implications for policing, and many other forces are afflicted by the same lack of understanding. And one of the recommendations is that more police forces should get to grips with the impact and the effect of social media and how it can impact on their investigations.
We should also, I suppose, reference Peter Faulding, Specialist Group International, and the effect that they had on this investigation. Mr. Faulding was the leader of this SGI organisation, Underwater Search Experts, that somehow became embroiled in this investigation, and indeed he was speaking to the media directly during this investigation, both of which I suspect the independent report has picked up on.
I can tell you exactly how he got embroiled in it, Neil, because I recommended him to the family. I've known Peter for a long time, and I've reported on him in a number of very high-profile investigations. He has a long and good track record in searching for bodies and other areas of police investigation. When I went up to Lancashire, I mentioned him to a friend of Nicola's family and suggested that he might be of use, and they contacted him, and they were, at that point, a week on, very frustrated at the police's lack of success in finding Nicola. So they brought him in, and the police acknowledged that if they'd refused to let him help, they would have perhaps looked as though they were being a bit obstructive, particularly as they hadn't found Nicola at that stage. So he did get involved, but he was a bit of a loose cannon, and he, in the absence of regular press updates from the force itself, he would talk to the media and he'd give his views on the investigation, and some things were accurate and some things were inaccurate. What the report does is not criticise him specifically, but it criticises the way Lancashire Police allowed him to talk freely to the media. And one other thing, I've interviewed Peter since, and he has said in an interview today that he is absolutely insistent that within 6 minutes of starting his search with sonar equipment around the river near the bench where Nicola disappeared, he found or detected her body.
When I see a body, I've been doing this since 1999, I've pioneered the use of sonar, so it was very clear to me that this probably was Nicola. The target I found has got laying in a fetal position, it's got a head, It measures precisely 1.61 metres, which is the same length as Nicola, as she is in height. I can see the crossed legs, I can see the arms, see the back and the bottom around. I, with all my experience, know what a body looks like.
He told the police dived that spot. The police say there wasn't a body, it was just tree branches. Now, Peter says, well, they didn't ask for the data that would back up my sonar images. He is absolutely adamant that he found Nicola's body 2 weeks before it eventually did emerge about a mile away further downstream. Famously, infamously,
yes.
You said that even after finding what you believe was Nicola,
yeah.
You said that she wasn't in the river. Why did you say that?
Because I believe the police. The police actually said to me, there's nothing there. And I did say to the team, this is odd, straight away. But I had to believe the police. I mean, I was swamped by the media. There was no control with the media. I was sort of, there was no police around. And they never asked me to stop talking to the media. And I didn't enjoy doing it. And they're just doing their job, the media. But I said that because I believe the police officer diving. We were not allowed to dive the target. I know if that had been us diving, Nicola would have been recovered.
Martin, the problems with this investigation, as identified by the independent report, do you think they would have been there had this incident taken place in London, where the Metropolitan Police were in charge, in Manchester, where GMP would have been in charge?
Most of my experience is dealing with the Metropolitan Police, and much as I jump up and down and rant and rave about what I sometimes think is poor communication from the Met, it's only when I go outside of London and deal with forces like Lancashire, and there are others, when I begin to understand in comparison how good the Press Bureau is at the Metropolitan Police. I don't believe this would have got out of hand if this had been a Metropolitan Police investigation in the same way that it did with Lancashire Police. For lots of reasons, I think there's a much more grown-up attitude at the Metropolitan Police about dealing with the media, giving us off-camera briefings. It's not perfect, and it's not like it was, but I think things would have been very different. But the upshot is, and let's be positive about this, I think what's emerged now is because of the bad way Lancashire Police handled their media relations, that there's going to be a sea change, or at least there's the impetus for a sea change between journalists and police. That fracture began after the Leveson inquiry, when Lord Leveson ruled that police officers often got too close to journalists. So that led to the drawbridge went up, the shutters came down, and it became very difficult to talk to police officers or police press officers. They all found an excuse to withdraw from us in a way, which was terrible if you're a crime reporter. But I think at least there's the impetus now for that to change. It's come, ironically, from the National College of Policing, which, as I said, I believe was beginning to treat us journalists as a threat rather than an asset. But maybe the pendulum is going to swing back, not so much in our favour, but in the favour of more open relationships. And that can only contribute to this terrible confidence problem, public confidence problem in policing. It's rock bottom. I think it can only improve. And that may be a direct result of this report into the Nicola Bulley investigation.
Martin, thank you. In just a moment, we'll reflect further on those inquiry findings with a former chief constable who herself handled a very high-profile investigation, that of Raoul Moat. Back soon. Back in the summer of 2010, a manhunt took place across Tyne and Wear and Northumberland. After killing one person and injuring two others, Raoul Moat went on the run, living wild for almost a week. The local community was terrorised. The world was, for want of a better word, enthralled, glued to the twists and turns of a search that ultimately ended with Moat turning the gun on himself. The Chief Constable of Northumbria Police during that time was Sue Sim, and she joins me now. Sue, given your experience of high-profile, highly visible investigations, have you got any sympathy for Lancashire Police?
I'm afraid I don't. I must admit I agree totally with the College of Policing that the investigative work that was undertaken by Lancashire was extremely good. However, had they declared a critical incident which means, in basic terms, if you have an incident that you know full well could have a detrimental impact on either the families involved, the victim, or the community in general, then you should establish what in policing terms we call a gold, silver and bronze strategy. So that means that the whole thing should have been led by a chief officer who would have then allowed a board to be called, which would have a community engagement and media and communications as a key element. What you had, unfortunately, with the Nicola Bulley investigation was the poor investigation officer who had a great deal of work to do with a search strategy, with all the things involved around the investigation. They had to do all the communication as well. This is not just an issue for Lancashire Police. This is a critical issue for policing in general, because they didn't grasp the narrative from a very, very early stage. It allowed yourselves, the media, to fill the void, and more importantly, it allowed social media to fill the void, and Lancashire never got that back.
But the things that you are talking about are no small failures, are they? Lack of support for the family, the information vacuum into which speculation emerges. Was this then, in your view, a consequence of a lack of leadership at Lancashire Police?
I think they just didn't realise how big this story was going to be. But the reality of the situation is, once the Chief Constable saw that the media interest was not dying down, the Chief Constable should have stepped in with their senior team, and that didn't happen, and therefore the Chief Constable should carry the weight of that decision.
I mean, let's be clear here. This was not the Metropolitan Police. This wasn't Greater Manchester Police. Was this potentially a matter of a smaller force being thrust into the spotlight in this manner by the level of interest, not just, of course, from the media, but from social media as well?
I'm afraid the issue is police officers, and chief officers in particular, still, no matter how many of these large incidents we have, they still do not grasp the importance of social media, the importance of communication with the media, the importance of communication with the communities. I remember back in 1988, Lockerbie incident, I remember as a very young police officer listening to the most compelling discussion that I've ever heard in policing. And it was from the father who lost his daughter, actually in Lockerbie. And he said he had no criticism of the investigation itself, but he was highly critical of the communication. What policing has to remember is that there is more than the victim when you are undertaking an investigation, particularly one of this size. And what you need to do is you need to have strategies around communication, around media management and support, and around community engagement are equally as critical as the investigation and the search strategies in this particular incident. Police officers still have their heads very stuck in the sand that their only role is to do the investigation. They don't understand the social science around actually having a multifaceted investigation approach.
Because, of course, and I remember this because we covered it on the podcast at the time, you had people descending on this part of the world, to the crime scene, in fact. How do you, though, manage a situation in which the internet descends on a town to conduct its own investigations?
You will always get people looking to social media for the conspiracy theories and everything else. But if the mainstream media is fully briefed into the operations, then what you have is people have the opportunity to actually read what is really going on. I had an absolutely superb media and communications manager who worked with me. She was a director of communications, and she was highly complimented by the media after the Moat incident concluded, because she kept everybody briefed. And believe me, it's quite difficult to be told as a chief constable when you are naturally reserved in relation to dealing with the press, that you have to go and sit in front of them every day, you have to conduct briefings with them, you have to be spending the majority of your time as the chief with briefing the communities and the media. But that is the way that 21st century policing needs to manage critical incidents.
Sue, thank you. And that's your lot for this edition of the Sky News Daily. We'll see you next time.